Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Mark Most. He is the host of Market Disruptors YouTube channel and The Mark Most Show. He's one of the most talented content creators I've ever met in my life. He's very, very good. Huge fan of his show, and I'm honored to have him back on Simply Bitcoin. So before we jump into it, I do want to give a shout out to the Bitcoin company that makes this show possible, Bitcoin Well. Guys, it's the self-custody platform. It's Bitcoin self-custody by default. Easy setup, easy to sign up. You got to check out bitcoinwell.com today. They're a publicly traded Canadian company. They just expanded to all 50 states. You got to check them out. Check out bitcoinwell.com. All right, everybody, let me bring on stage. Hey, Mark, how you doing, man?
What a nice intro. I don't believe it, but thank you for that. But yeah, always a pleasure. You say I'm a legend creating content. Man, the first time I went on your show way back in the day, I remember I've told you many times, man, so creative, so fun. I love being here. So thanks for having me back.
I meant every word. It's what you do is incredible, like from the script writing to just the production quality itself. And, you know, you work in media and you understand how difficult that is. And you only get to that through repetition and experience and like making every mistake in the book. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. I'm not just saying that's a book up your ass.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, man, look, so much to talk about, you know, crazy stuff. Let's start off with the ETFs. I know that you've been covering that. It's a complete game changer to the Bitcoin space. The price ran up. I suspect that it was responsible for the run up from 25K to 50K, the whole ETF narrative. A lot of people knew beforehand. The SEC completely dropped the ball. Gary Gensler made a fool of himself. Yeah. So Mark Most, what's your take on the Bitcoin ETF? What's the significance of it? How are you feeling about it?
Well, first off, I'll say that I've always said that I think the price of Bitcoin is the least important thing, or I should say the least interesting thing to talk about. Obviously, we throw out, you know, NGU, number go up technology, and it's fun. I was writing a newsletter, a Bitcoin-only newsletter for a while. I'm not currently still writing it, but the opening line was Bitcoin is the great bait and switch. You come for the money and then you stay for the freedom. And so I think there's a much more interesting, much more important things. There's much bigger problems that we have in the world today. And I think Bitcoin solves those. And that's what's interesting, not the price. And I did throw a little, I'm just saying this because I did throw a little shade out on Twitter where I'm like, man, all I hear is ETF. It's like, I'm tired of it, but here we are. It's important for a couple of reasons. One, we want the NGU to work because of that feedback loop and that bait and switch, as I said, right? We need the number to go up so we get the volatility down, and then people in third world countries could benefit more from it if the volatility goes down. So there's a lot of reasons why NGU and the ETFs are good. Specifically, though, I would say about the price, I would agree with you on that. I think because the market is so small, it's a very inelastic supply, which means the price moves up really quickly. And what happens is it sort of becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy. So what happens is when these ETFs started looking like they were getting closer, obviously there was lots of talk going on about that. And what happened is people start wanting to front run that. So because markets are forward looking, so it's like, well, this is going to happen, so let me buy now. And what happened is as people started buying now, it started pushing the price up, which then made more people want to buy. So when people buy, the price went up, which made more people want to buy. And it created this feedback loop. But also there was something else going on. I made a video December 5th saying, warning, Bitcoin ETFs. And the warning was that I said, I think this is going to be a buy the rumor, sell the news event. And the reason why is just a week or two before I was in Fort Worth at the Texas Blockchain Association. And I found myself at dinner with like 10 people, Peter McCormick and Caitlin Long and Natalie was there. And there was a few bankers and regulators there. I don't want to say all their names. And we started talking about the ETFs and they started explaining the way they worked. And that was that most of these big ETFs, they're not going to just go buy the Bitcoin off of the market the day they open. They've been buying them Bitcoin and they keep them in a buffer or feeder account. The buffer account will be actively trading the market, finding the best time to buy. The ETF will be buying and selling from their account. And so because of that, it wasn't like we were going to expect them to go buy a bunch of Bitcoin that day they got announced, which is why I made the video. I thought all these people would lead that run up. But anyway, I'm saying this because to add into your point, Nico, it wasn't just the retail people trying to front run it. It was also the ETFs seeding their accounts. And so it caused this massive run up. Now, as soon as the ETFs were announced, we did get a little sell off. It wasn't massive, but it had a kind of a considerable drop, at least compared to other markets. The video I'd made was warning, don't get shaken out. Like you're probably going to see this. Use it as a buying opportunity. Don't get shaken out. That's exactly what happened. And since then, we've seen an enormous amount of buying. A lot of people trying to throw shade on him, saying that it was a flop. Mike Green's out there talking about how it was a failure, things like that. In my opinion, it was a massive success. The amount of Bitcoin that's being sucked, hoovered off of the market is, it depends on the day, but upwards of 10 times the amount of new Bitcoin being created. And it's creating that feedback loop. And already, Nico, I mean, what are we, a month into it approximately? And we're already seeing, I put up this on Twitter the other day, about 50% of investors are in passively managed funds. And so now what we're seeing is a lot of these managers that manage these passive indexes are starting to allocate towards Bitcoin. And again, it's a feedback loop. So they add it, they start outperforming. So more people have to buy it. They start outperforming. More people buy it, and man, we're in the thick of it right now.
And I'm incredibly excited for the next cycle. What you said about how these managers are adding it, and I remember there was this news coming out of Canada, and it was the conservative all-in-one Fidelity ETF, and it got that sweet 1% Bitcoin allocation. And I'm like, this is a game changer. Why is it a game changer? Because as soon as they get a taste of this, all the other, they're not going to have a choice, right? The market forces are going to do what market forces do best. Right. And you're going to be in a position where you can make the argument that you're hurting your client by not having exposure to Bitcoin. And I think that virus has infected Wall Street.
I would agree on that. And that's kind of what I said, this sort of competitive nature, right? So it's like, hey, if they're outperforming me, then I have to do the same thing as them. And then that sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But there's two things that I think are important. So one, just specifically in regards to that, right? That's important. And we understand now, like I said, that chart I put on Twitter, I think last week, most people aren't managing their own money. So most people are going to end up owning Bitcoin and not even knowing it. So that's a pretty big deal, because if they start doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, they don't have to go convince everybody. They just move. Yeah, there we go. There's the chart, right? They can move the market. But I think there's something else going on that's really big that a lot of people who don't understand multidisciplinary subjects like technology and cycles maybe miss. And I'm talking about specifically something known as diffusion of innovation. So in a new technology chart, you've all seen the bell curve, and you have the innovators, the true believers. I'm sorry, the true believers. Then there's the chasm, and then there's the early majority, and there's the late majority. And the reason why I bring that up is that we've seen Bitcoin go from the innovators, obviously the coders, the developers, the true believers. That's me and you. We haven't been able to shut up at it, for many years. But then there's the chasm. And typically that was really, it's a technology curve, but it's really about a marketing curve. And the reason why the chasm is there is something has to change in the mindset of people that will start to bring in the early majority. There we go. Yeah, perfect chart. And so I think there's lots of things that start helping it get across the chasm, but the ETF is the piece that moves it across the chasm. And now all of a sudden, I didn't even know I was owning Bitcoin. No wonder my portfolio was doing so good. And it legitimizes it, right? So there's still a lot of stigmas. Oh, the government's going to make it illegal. And how do I store it? And, all the other pieces of FUD we hear all the time. But I think it's going to cross the chasm. And that's a really, really, really big deal. We're seeing it not just because the ETFs. We're seeing Larry Fink, the largest, the manager of the largest asset fund in the world, say that people are running to Bitcoin for safety. Like we're seeing this thrust into the United States presidential campaigns. And so we're really seeing this chasm being crossed. The ETFs are sort of propelling that, but then it crosses the chasm at the time it's available. I mean, this is fireworks.
The halving is on the way, right? It's like the ETF is doing its thing. They're buying a lot more Bitcoin that is being, dropped in the market every single day. And then the halving's right around the corner, and it creates this perfect series of events. And that's a perfect segue to my next question. I think last cycle we had, a lot of people felt like it underperformed. I have a theory. I think it had to do with the China ban. I think it had to do with the fact that the hash rate, dropped like 50%. Those miners had to sell to relocate to more favorable jurisdictions. And I think that really cut the market short. A lot of people are saying that it's the FTX stuff. I really believe it had to do a lot with the miners. And I believe that's part of the reason that we didn't get to 100K. Now, a lot of people, the very strong narrative that I see this cycle, I see a lot of people talk about, Mark, is this idea of diminishing returns, right? So my question to you is, are we late to Bitcoin? Is the opportunity still there for an investor or someone who's looking at Bitcoin? They're seeing it's currently at $51,631, and they're like, oh, man, I missed the train. How would you convince that person?
Yeah. So you missed the boat. Sorry, you're never going to make 1,000,000% again, but you can still make a few thousand, right? Like, I mean, think about this, right? We just have to kind of think about this in like rational terms, right? Like, unfortunately, we're in a gamble culture today, which that's a whole nother topic if we want to dive into. But now I deal with this all the time. Like, people are like, oh, if I can't make 2,000% in the next 30 days, it's no good. I'll go get this altcoin or whatever, right? So yeah, you missed out, right? You're not going to make the 1,000,000% again, like we did if you bought in, 2010, 2011, but you're still got hundreds of percent in front of you, which is still better than any other asset that you can potentially get into. So you missed that, but what's in front of us is still better than anything else that's out there. So back to the law of diminishing returns, that was sort of what I was talking about with these ETFs, right? If we get enough people to bring in the money and we get the NGU to go up enough, it lowers the volatility. So volatility works both ways, right? It goes up and down. And so as the asset gets bigger, the volatility will go down, which means, yes, the diminishing returns, the pumps will be less, but also the drawdowns will be less. Instead of 90% drawdowns, we had 80% drawdowns, then 70% drawdowns, and eventually we get to 50% draw, right? So the drawdowns are worse or less, and the pumps are less as well. I do think that's the case. As a matter of fact, I spent 4 hours this morning in deep work. I'm working on a new report that I'm putting out. A couple years ago, I did a video called Michael Saylor's Strategy to Retire Off of Bitcoin, and it went pretty viral. And I'm redoing that, and I'm going to put it out as a report with a calculator and everything. And it's a very basic sort of forecast of where I think Bitcoin could go and how you could use this calculator. But I put in the diminishing returns into there of going down to, 25%, 15%, 10%. Returns instead of the 200% we've seen as a compounded annual growth rate. So I would say that. But the other thing I would say, though, just to sort of make the newcomers feel pretty good about this, I started buying Bitcoin in 2015 when it was $300, which is great, right? Except for, I would say, and I know this is hard for people to understand, I think today is a better risk-adjusted entry than it was back then, because it was so new, it was so risky. I couldn't risk more than a couple $1,000, right? Or whatever that number is to you, small bets. Today, I make really big bets into it, right? And because the risk is gone. So it's a better risk-adjusted entry. You can put more allocation towards it. And we still have, lots of returns in front of us.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And there was one of your recent episodes, you had, the legend Jeff Booth on your show. Two legends, Mark Moss and Jeff Booth together. And you guys went down, a rabbit hole. And I think it was, you recently tweeted it out, Jeff Booth threw some absurd number out there. I think it was like 42. It was just crazy. Opti, I don't know if you can.
Well, a $900 trillion worth of assets. And so, it's like a $42 billion Bitcoin.
And it's just crazy. So I have the clip, and we'll play it and then we'll discuss it. Here we go.
So what's different here is the $900 trillion of global wealth. Imagine you have a percentage of that ledger, right? And you could say, like, if Mark Moss has $1 million, you could just calculate exactly what percent you have of that ledger. If that ledger is 1.5 quadrillion tomorrow, because there's a whole bunch more manipulation of money, and your part of that ledger doesn't go up by that amount, you lost money, but you didn't know you lost money.
Sure.
That's what you're living in. And that's what everyone is pricing theirs in. And when they naturally say, what is Bitcoin price in this ledger? They're making that calculation error. When I say it's saying decentralized and secure on the base ledger, then it is inevitable if it stays decentralized and secure. It reprices everything in the 900 trillion.
Mark, what did he just say?
Well, what he said is, first of all, I get all excited and I talk all fast. Jeff just talks so calm and thoughtfully. What he said though is that nobody. He didn't say this, but we have to think about it like this: nobody wants money, which is crazy, but we don't. We don't want money. What we want are the things that money buys us. What we want is goods and services. So money is not wealth. Goods and services are wealth. I use money to get the goods and services. I use money to store my value until I'm ready to get the goods and services that I want. And so when you think about it like that, what he's saying and what that means is that I don't want money, I want goods and services. Goods and services are wealth. So you take all the wealth of the world and then you divide it by all the money of the world, which is why you can't just increase the money supply. You have to increase the goods and services, the wealth. So what he's saying is you'll get $900 trillion of wealth of goods and services. And if it was all denominated in Bitcoin, then you would have to divide the 21 million by the 900 trillion. It's no different than if we went back to a gold standard. So you might hear like Jim Rickards or somebody talk about how we're going back to a gold standard. And what would happen is you'd have to take all the fiat in the world, however much that is, and then you have to divide it by all the gold that's in the world. And that would reprice gold to about 50 or 60,000 an ounce. They could say, well, we're going to do a 20% backing. Okay, so it's down to 30,000 ounce. But you take all the fiat divided by all the gold. So this is sort of what Jeff Booth is saying. We take all the wealth, 900 trillion, and divide it by all the Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, and let me ask you something. If you were to put a number on it, we're getting to speculation territory, but if you were to put a percentage of the world's wealth that is going to be allocated to Bitcoin in the next 10, 15 years, what would that percentage be? And what would be your thought process to get to that percentage? I'm sure you've covered this topic and I'm sure you've put some thought into that.
Yeah, sure. So the way that I look at it, because I've been a private investor, I have the fund, the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund. Shout out to the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund. But I've done a lot of private equity and a lot of venture capital stuff over the last decade and a half or so. And the way that we look at like a venture cap deal, just super simple, like I'm pitching you Uber 15 years ago up in Silicon Valley, and you're like, well, what the heck is this worth? I don't even an app to call a car, like I can just call a cab, right? What's it worth? Oh, it's worth 100 million. Like, where did you get 100 million? Well, the taxi industry is this big, the limo industry is this big, right? If we take 5% from each of those. So that's sort of what we look at if we're looking at like some sort of projection. So I think about like, what are the asset categories that Bitcoin could demonetize? So certainly store of value assets. Booth is talking about every asset, but let's just take a look at like, what are store of value assets? So if we look at like, well, people store their wealth or their value in gold. So gold's whatever, 12, 13 trillion. They're storing it in offshore bank accounts. That's 30 to 40 trillion. I know you posted that clip of Obama like a week or two ago talking about it's like a Swiss bank account in your pocket. So 30 to 40 trillion sitting there. A lot of real estate is homes, but a lot of real estate is a place to store wealth. There's about 300 trillion there. So if we look at just store of value assets alone, you're at like about 400 trillion. So it could certainly take 5% of that. And then, Jeff talks about going all the way to where it becomes the unit of account and everything's priced in it. And so I think of this as a long evolutionary process. And this is where most people get completely wrong. At the BitBlock Boom in Dallas and at Pack Bitcoin, I gave a keynote and I kind of talked about the time frame. And I think this plays out over a 50-year time frame because there's an evolution. So it starts as a collectible. Oh, look, this is something cool. I'll keep it. Look at this cool rock, this cool feather, this cool shell, this cool baseball card, cool Pokemon card. If maybe, not all times, but maybe that collectible could evolve to a store of value. So rich people store their value, store their wealth in old cars, collectibles, fine art, things like that. Then if it has the right money attributes, it could, not always, but it could evolve to the next stage, which is now a medium of exchange. If it's portable, divisible, durable, fungible, things like that, it could be a medium of exchange. And then potentially it could evolve to that unit of account that Jeff Booth is talking about. So when you ask me the question, the first thing I'm saying this long answer because I want to clarify over what time frame. So the way that I think about it is I think it could be worth $1 million per Bitcoin by the end of the decade in 5 or 6 years from now. And I think, I was searching for an article doing this report that I'm working on, and you had posted about what's his name? The guy from Fidelity, Jury, right? And they're predicting that Bitcoin could be worth $1 billion by 2038. So sort of in this calculator that I'm putting together, I think in 20 years from now, I mean, I had Bitcoin getting up to about 18 million per coin over 20 years. That'd be by 2043. Again, he said $1 billion. Fidelity said $1 billion by 2038. So we'll have to see. Now, I do want to just for everybody's sake, that means that $1 million is nothing. So in Zimbabwe, everybody became a billionaire, but it was 350 billion for one egg. So you have to keep that in mind.
And that goes back to Jeff's original point, which is like, you don't want more money. Essentially what you want is the purchasing power that comes with that aspect. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting conversation. And of course, the opportunity is still there, right? It's like maybe
let me use another example so people can understand this, right? So let's just say, we hear about the rise of the BRICS and all these nations, the BRICS nations, they're going to ditch U.S. treasuries. They're going to start storing their wealth in gold, for example, right? So let's just say one of these nations, they have $100 billion in their sovereign fund. So like the $100 billion, we're dumping treasury, we're going to buy gold. Okay, like there's not $100 billion of gold to buy right now. You can't buy it. So then someone might say, well, there's not enough gold to go around then. Well, there's not enough gold to go around at the current price. So the price of gold would have to go to 4,000 or 5,000. Then at 4,000 or 5,000, there's enough gold to go around. And so then if you think about it like that, that's the same with Bitcoin, right? Because we can't expand the amount of Bitcoin, we can divide it. We can't get more of it. And so that's why the price has to go up to get the rest of that value to come into it.
Gotcha. No, it makes sense. It makes sense. So, Mark, you're in content creation. We're both in media, and I feel like we are living to pivot the conversation a little bit, because I feel like the last really month or two was extremely historic, especially with the Tucker Carlson interview. And what I'm basically seeing is and then he had this incredible interview a couple of days ago where I forget what the name of the guy was, but basically this guy was saying that, the legacy media was essentially an arm. Matt Benz.
Mike Benz.
Yeah. Thanks, Opti. And it was just my eyes. I had the suspicion that a lot of these, I call it the legacy media, was captured, so to speak. It sounds so absurd when you talk about it. But the reason I'm bringing this up is what I'm seeing, the pattern that I'm seeing is the rise of independent media. So it's no longer these, credible sources. It's no longer CNN, Fox News. Yeah. You're seeing the rise of podcasters. You're seeing the rise of independent content creators, and they're the ones that are getting the bulk of the views. And because they're the ones getting the bulk of the views, governments have never been able to. How do you control an independent content creator? Like how do you control the narrative? How do you control what that person has to say? And I think the conversation has shifted a lot of the in terms of the acceptable window of discourse. That thing is just moving. It's just keeps moving in a certain direction. I think a lot of people are getting exposed to ideas that were normally confined, to the dark sides of the internet, but it wouldn't be talked about in the mainstream. And now you're having those types of conversations talked about in the mainstream. And it's incredibly exciting, right? Especially for people who make media, but it's also incredibly exciting from a humanities standpoint, because now it's like humanity's free in a way. So I wanted to get your take on that. Am I seeing things that are not there? That's my personal interpretation of it.
There's a lot to unpack there, Nico. It's Mike Benz, not Matt Benz. And man, I'm so disappointed. I missed the freaking boat, dude. I've been talking with him DMs, and I was like, hey, I want to get you on the show. He's like, yeah, let's do it. Tell me when you want to come. Hey, when are we going to do it? And I never booked him. And that was like the last couple weeks. And now he's on Tucker, and now he's like untouchable. So missed my boat on that one. But anyway, what he talked about, I mean, you said it's a little bit surprising. It's hard to believe. I don't think so at all. I mean, this is exactly how it works. And it's not just him. So if we look at there's a book written called The Revolt of the Public. Martin Gurry wrote the book. I had him on my show. Amazing book. Highly recommend anybody read it. And he worked for the CIA. And we had the .com run up into 2000. We had the sell-off. In 2001, he said more information was created than all of humanity before that. in 1 year. And then double that the next year, double the next year. He said, wow, this is unsustainable. So anyway, he went and did this book, and he talked about basically the revolt of the public is how the internet is overthrowing governments. And he talked about like the Arab Spring in Egypt, which Mike Benz talked about. And Mike Benz talked about how the powers that be, the military industrial complex, whatever, was using the internet to literally overthrow and do these color revolutions. But once the tool got big enough where now you and I are able to do this, and specifically more like a Tucker Carlson or somebody got big enough to challenge or actually to overtake mainstream media, all of a sudden they start freaking out. So I think having read that book, a year ago, really opened up my eyes to it. Hearing Mike Benz lay out, the guy's like a walking encyclopedia. I mean, he knows every single name, date. It's just insane. It really brought context to it. So maybe my mind was a little bit more open to it. But, to the point that you said, it's what a exciting time to be alive. It's exciting, but Nico, it's also very scary. And probably a year and a half ago, I told my wife that there's a good chance that I won't be able to live in America and do what I do within the next 5 years.
And you believe that the reason for that is just you're expecting how do I phrase this? You're expecting a reaction from the system.
Well, not expecting, we're already seeing it. So we can already just look at this. So for example, I mean, these are fringe examples, but you start to see the slippery slope, right? So the founder of Tornado Cash, right? Like he created a piece of software, he ended up in jail, right? Now, what they do is like, hey, with Alex Jones, let's just get him off the face of the earth. But you really can't, because the internet's a little bit decentralized. We can take away his ability to make money. We can just sue him to high hell. We can make sure he can never work again. But you can't really get rid of him. And now we have tools that I'm bullish on. What a time to be alive! These decentralized communication protocols like Nostr. But if the government can't shut that down, then their only option is to kill you. And so we already see this. Like, what was this? The Restrict Act. We had 26 high-ranking members of the government sign on to this Restrict Act, which basically said any piece of technology that the government deems to be a threat to national security. And today, misinformation is a threat. I mean, everything's a threat to national security these days. So anything that they deem to be a threat to national security would be 1, punishable by 20 years in prison, 2, $1 million fine, and 3, and a loss of all your property, right? That's what they're proposing, Nico. And so that's an extreme, but that can't happen in America. Well, they literally signed the bill, and we can already see it happen in Canada. So in Canada, as I'm sure you're aware, they have a bill now where, content creators now have to register with the state. It's insane. And so it starts with the registration process, right, for your safety. They start putting these walls in, and they have to. And this goes back to the revolt of the public. If you kind of understand this from a psychological and a political level, the only way a government can maintain power is by controlling the narrative. That's it. Right. So in the 1500s, before the Protestant Reformation, the church and state was able to control the narrative because people didn't have the Bible. The printing press disseminated that information. And once that information got to the public, the church and state could no longer hold on to the power. Even though they tried, they killed everybody, labeled them heretics, etc. And so today we're seeing the same thing where we have the state trying to maintain a narrative, but the internet sleuths, like the internet investigators, they just debunk. They just bring the information out just so quick. The government can't maintain it. So they'll do just like the 1500s. They'll start to kill all the heretics, or, kill their character, assassinate their character, make them go bankrupt, whatever they will. Hopefully not actually kill them. But it's just not going to work. But that's kind of where we're at. So what a time to be alive, Nico. But it could get scary.
I agree. And, I joke around with Opti all the time. And, as a first generation American, you get sold this idea of the U.S., the home of the land of the free, home of the brave. And, I come from originally my parents, and I come from Venezuela, right? So I saw this country, essentially one of the wealthiest countries in South America, and it fell to collectivism within 20 years. So seeing the same signs is so apparent. You're right. It's absolutely scary. And I joke with Opti. I say, hey man, we're going to try to hold it down here, but if not, we're going to change Simply Bitcoin's name to Simplemente Bitcoin, and we're going to move to El Salvador. So what other locations would you have envisioned? Where would you escape to? Because there's that other narrative, which is, if America falls, everywhere else falls. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. Because what happens is you always need one bright spot, right? Like we should be like split testing, right? Like, wow, let's try capitalism in America and let's try socialism everywhere else. Well, it looks like capitalism worked, right? So we should always have that, and it's exactly why they want America to fall, because you can't, if you read back to like the collapse of the USSR, like the Gulag Archipelago and some of the works of those guys, you can see what the communist state tried to do is they had to eliminate all truth, because as soon as somebody could break free and live the truth, and people saw that, they would want that. It's why China has had the Great Firewall. What literally brought the end of the COVID mandates there in China was when the World Cup was on, and they tried to like obfuscate the people in the stands so that people in China couldn't see they weren't wearing masks. And when all the people in China saw they weren't wearing masks, they were like, "What? They don't have to wear, like we're done with it, right?" So they can't allow that to happen. That's why America has to come down. We can't have the shining beacon that people want, and nor can we have history, because they don't want people thinking about the good old days. Oh, remember how good it used to be? So they have to change history to be bad. So we don't want to go back to that, right? So that's what happens in a cultural revolution like Mao's China or what we're having here. But back to the question that you asked, like, where would we go? We don't know the answer to that. So I think about, we have massive uncertainty in front of us. And the way that we beat uncertainty is with optionality. So the more options I have, the more equipped I'll be able to deal with whatever comes up, and we don't know what those are. Some of the ways I think through it, though, are, first of all, one, there's no utopia for everybody, because we all want something different. So, for example, I'm a big fan of Mexico. I'm building a house down in Mexico right now. A lot of people are fans of Mexico, but some people want to be in Tulum or Playa del Carmen because it's beautiful there, and I agree it is, but there's no waves there. So for me, I want to be on the other coast of Mexico where there's waves. You see, so it's just little things like that. But I would start to look at the nation and think about, how did they handle the last pandemic? That's sort of a good litmus test. And then sort of like, what are their policies right now? So like in Mexico, for example, you could easily say that the government is more authoritarian and more closer to communist than the US is, but they're not able to really enforce that. So the actual people that live there live way more free than we do in the United States, for example, even though the government is more restrictive. And the same could be said throughout Central America. So I think, one, how do they do that? I think about some of the eastern parts of Europe who are sort of freshly out of communism. They're not going to be going back to that anytime soon. El Salvador, you mentioned El Salvador. What's going on down there is so exciting. It makes me kind of want to go be a piece of that right now, because they're trending in the right direction. But that being said, I want to say one more thing and I'll take a break. But we have to be able to hold two thoughts in our head at the same time. I'm sure you would agree, Nico, because you make content, so you see it all like I do. One big problem that people have today is they lack all nuance and critical thinking. Everything's not linear. There's nuance with everything, right? And so we have to be able to manage two thoughts in our head. And the two thoughts are, dang, the US is going in the bad direction. It's like really bad. And like where we're going, it's going to get bad. But at the same time, it's still the best place to be. So I can hold both of those thoughts at the same time. El Salvador is going in the right direction. Oh my gosh, look how exciting. Look what they're building. So it's going in the right direction, but today it's not that good of a place. So you have to be able to hold both of those points, and you have to be able to balance that out, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And that's a really, really great way of looking at it. And I kind of want to go back to, because it's a very fascinating rabbit hole, which is basically the why the US is heading in this direction. And, you can basically, start in the 60s, right? You can go down that rabbit hole. It's a fascinating rabbit hole. But I want to get your take. Like, what happened? Like, why did this happen? What happened? Is this solvable, right? You're starting to see a little bit of a pushback in the US, especially from the Tea Party, and you kind of see it. But, a part of me, it's like, is it too little too late? Is this just history repeating itself? So I want to get your take on that.
Well, first I would say, how did we get here? I mean, let's come back to that. Let's talk about, is it too late? And it is too late. And here's what I mean by that. I've said, I did a show with Breedlove, and I said, I called it the crisis of confidence, crisis in authority of confidence. And what I said is that the current form of government we have is no longer compatible with the world that we live in. Not just the United States, all around the world. So it's too late because the current form of government that we've known and we've had is not compatible anymore. It won't work. We can't go back to it. So what do I mean by that? You've heard me talk about cycles quite a bit. I look at three big cycles: political cycles, technological revolution cycles, and financial cycles. It's always technology that changes the world. It changes the world because it changes the way that we communicate, and it changes the way that we organize, right? And so I mentioned the printing press in the 1500s. The world had moved towards centralization. All right. What happened? You had the feudal system. So the feudal system was very centralized from the top down. And then that got disbanded. We sort of went into the dark ages, and then it was the church that started bringing all the repair, bringing everything back, and then it got back to centralized, where you had the church and the state over everything. Technology then created the printing press, which then broke the grip of that, and we went back to a decentralized world: farms, cottage industry, etc. Then 250 years later, so it's a 250-year cycle, this moves, right? 250 years later, you have the Industrial Revolution, and so now I couldn't be in the farms and factories anymore. I had to move into the cities, or farms and cottage. I had to move to the cities for the factories. And so then that was the technology created this massive centralizing force and it wasn't just like, so it had to be in the cities. And then we had, 1908, Henry Ford created the automobile, but what he really created was mass production. And so that centralizing force of technology continued for 100 years, and it culminated in the early 1900s, where we had mass production. And in order to manage mass production, I had to have a mass management style to manage the masses like cogs in a wheel. So I can get maximum performance looking at everybody as a performance person on like an assembly line. All right. So we had mass production, which then grew a mass middle class, because dumb people and smart people were equal on an assembly line. So instead of having this dispersion like we should have naturally, everybody created this middle class. We had this mass production, so we had mass management, and then we created mass government to manage the mass management of the mass production. Okay. But we don't live in that world anymore. We're no longer in mass production. Now we're not in the industrial age anymore. Now we're in the information age. And that's part of the reason why that we have this massive disparity between income, this income inequality gap, as they call it. I don't think it's a problem like people say it is. We have this massive gap in income because we're not all equal on an assembly line. Now smarter people get further ahead. But what this means is that instead of big cities and big factories, and mass management, manage people like a cog in a wheel. That's what Keynesian economics does, right? Manage people like a cog in a wheel. Now we have people like you and me making money on the internet, traveling the world, doing all these different things. And that form of government that was built to manage the masses, it doesn't work anymore. You can't have 330 million people in the United States under a single regime. It won't work. Not with the internet. When we were kids, I know I'm going on a little bit of a rant here. Let me finish this point. When we were kids, you're younger than me, so maybe you don't remember as much as I did. But when we were kids, we all listened to the same music. We all watched the same movies. We all wore the same thing. But the internet allowed all of this diversity, and it allowed us to all find these little niches. And we started getting more and more niched out, right? Now we listen to different music. We watch different movies. We wear different things. And so the central government that we've had that was created to manage a world from 100 years ago, it doesn't work anymore, and it won't work. Now, the way the country was founded, under 50 independent states under one government, we could go back to that, but we can't have one central government over 330 million people.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And it's so, I think every Bitcoiner, every person at this point, you have to read The Sovereign Individual. They lay this out. I completely agree with you. Information technologies makes that system obsolete, and kind of leads me to circle back to the original question that I asked you, which is we're witnessing this happen in real time, and it's just crazy. And then watching the response. I'll tell you this, Mark, and you'll appreciate this. I saw who's the old host of the Daily Show? I forget, Jon Stewart.
Okay, yeah, Jon Stewart.
It was Jon Stewart.
He's back, by the way, with another show, but yeah.
He came back to host the Daily Show as a guest, and he did the first episode he came back on, he did it on Tucker. and you're watching, and I remember watching this like 15 years ago. I'd be like, this is a huge fan of the show. And I remember I was like watching the show, and with the fake laughs in the background, like, like the SNL laughs, like they add the laugh tracks into the episodes. And I'm looking at that, I'm like, dude, this is propaganda. Like, this is 10 times better, 100 times better than the Soviet Union. This is crazy. They're literally attacking this man's character because he did an interview that was outside the acceptable window of discourse. And it was just so fascinating to me, man, how things are changing. So, okay, how can individuals, what advice would you give individuals other than buy Bitcoin, other than do your own research? What advice would you give to individuals, and what advice, how would you tell them to deal with their parents that perhaps can't move with the times?
Yeah. I think it's pretty evident at this point that we're not going to be voting ourselves out of this. I believe that we have to build our way out of this. Like, it's up to, like, if you look at like Ayn Rand's, the Atlas Shrugged, right? It's like the productive people of the world are the ones that drive the world. We're the ones with the ideas, the innovations, the hard work, the effort, and we create the world through building. And then you have the unproductive class, as she said, when you have to get permission to produce from men who produce nothing. So you have this unproductive class that doesn't produce anything. They're like parasites trying to pull. But we have to build our way out of this. So back to this form of government's no longer compatible. We can see this, like when they're trying to enact bills, like they're going, like Elizabeth Warren wants to like change the way like the Bitcoin code works. And like, she wants to like make miners have to collect KYC data, like travel rule, like, okay, that doesn't work. You can't self-custody. Like, I can't know 12 words in my head. Like, what do you like? How does that work? Right. So like they're not able to keep up with how fast the world is changing. And so it's up to us as builders, as entrepreneurs. I know you are, Nico. I am, to build our way out of this. And so what does the average person do about this? One, you have to learn to take care of yourself. You have to think about your own health, right? Become the better player, like get your mind right, learn how to think critically, learn how to digest and discern information. You have to build up your health and your energy and your focus. And you got to get your money right? Like, there's no way to escape the matrix unless you have money and influence. You need money and influence. My kids, they call them NPCs. If you don't have that, you're a non-player. You need to be a player character. You need to be a character, right? Power up your character. You need to up level your life. You need to create some income. And that means like get out of your mom's basement, stop watching Netflix, and like work, man. Like build something, develop something. Go work with people who are building and developing something. Learn to create wealth by providing value into the world. Then yes, with that excess money, of course, buy Bitcoin. Right. But Bitcoin doesn't help you if you don't have any savings. And there was that tweet going around the last couple of days with Russell Okong, and he was talking about how nobody's in these, I think it was third world countries, Africa, or whatever, wasn't into buying Bitcoin because they don't have any savings. And so take care of yourself, build up your energy, your effort, think clearly, go start building either on your own or go help people who are building. Create wealth by putting value into the world, take that value, and then you can start, parking that over into Bitcoin. But yeah, we're going to have to build our way out of this. It's the doers, it's the builders. I'm super bullish on when millions of entrepreneurs are, backs are against the wall.
Yeah. And they're completely unleashed, and, no one's going to judge them based on where they're from, whatever. The internet is going to give them not equal opportunity, right? But at least a shot. Right. And, I'm incredibly excited. So, there is going to be a backlash, and this is talked about in the Sovereign Individual. And I think you wrote a book with him. Svetsky calls them the laggards, in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. They're called the looters, right? Yeah. The people that benefit from, the welfare state, right? There's just this idea, that is based on the wealth redistribution mechanism that is enabled by fiat, right? Once that mechanism, gets attacked or, affected, like, how are they going to be able to, give away that free stuff that they're promising, right? I don't think they'll be able to the way that they have in the past. And I think that's going to be a shock to a large portion of the population. Yeah. What is that pushback going to look like? How do people protect themselves? Are we just all going to move to a citadel in the middle of nowhere and just surround ourselves with I'm making a joke, but I'm dead serious at the same time.
I think we have a model right in front of us. We can see it. Remember, I talked about this competitive nature where we can see these models playing out. So if your listeners haven't been paying attention, like, everyone needs to be watching what's going on in South Africa. And I don't want to get into like the super weeds into this, but like you basically had South Africa, which was like one of the richest nations, the richest nation on the African continent, one of the great richest nations in the world. They had their apartheid thing. They decided to break down the apartheid, and then they started doing DEI. So then we had to get instead of meritocracy, we had to have equity and inclusion. And we can see how well that's going for us here, and it did equally bad there. There are a few decades in front of us. Let's fast forward. South Africa is now in complete shambles. They can't even keep their electricity on, Nico. It's been this way. Some of my best friends came from South Africa. So in high school, I remember hearing these stories. And even back then, there was areas where the police couldn't go to because the crime was so bad. But anyway, now today it's so bad they can't even keep the electricity on. They have between like 12 to 16-hour power blackouts every single day in South Africa. So now they have no electricity, which means they have no commerce. They have no business. Like all their ports, like some of the best export ports in the world, they're all shut down. No one, they can't man them, can't run them. I might be over exaggerating some of this, but the power shut down 12, 14 hours a day. So then their economy's crumbling. There's no tax revenue. They can't fund the police. Crime is ridden. Okay. So it's really bad. However, the point that I'm making is in South Africa, there's little enclaves where people have decided to create their own power grids and have their own police. And you have these enclaves throughout the country where people are living that citadel, if you will. Now, not the lone wolf. What's happening, this is a very sad thing. I hate to even bring this up, but there's basically genocide going on down there, and they're just slaughtering like the white farmers that are out on the farms. But in these enclaves, they've built up their cities. They have their own power generation, their own police, etc. And so that's sort of a model of like what could happen in a failed state like that. And yet you still sort of have the citadels, to your point. And I'm sure, I haven't been to Argentina, but I'm guessing even in Argentina, Venezuela, countries that have completely collapsed, they still have these enclaves, these pockets of people that are productive.
And what's really interesting too about these pockets is like not only the self-sufficiency, but also the self-reliance. And by being self-reliant, it shows that a large central government is obsolete. It's not necessary in a way. So yeah, and you hear that, but usually in Venezuela, the stories that I hear is like the very wealthy class. They have like they still have restaurants they can go to, right? They still have, there's ways to live in that location,
yeah,
and not get as affected. So it's very, very interesting. We are getting to the top of the hour mark, and I do want to be respectful to your time. I do also want to give you the opportunity, if you had a message to the Simply Bitcoin audience, what is going to happen in the next 5-10 years? We've been talking about it, but what's on your mind?
Yeah, I would say, I kind of threw out some of this already, so it might be a little bit redundant to say it again, but I would say, one, everyone has to kind of take care of themselves again, right? We can't just hope and pray and vote our way out of this. I think that's pretty apparent right now. So we have to build our way out of this. So we just kind of have to build up our own lives, and sort of back to these examples of these enclaves, even in horrible situations, people are still able to rise up and live the life that they want. So even as the world gets worse, you and I as individuals can still navigate this for our own benefit. Okay. So with this phone, I can learn anything, meet anybody, do anything. And so we can still be responsible. So we're not victims. We can take responsibility for ourselves. We can build our way out of this. Now, once we've taken care of ourselves, like the airplane, put the mask on yourself. Now, how do we help other people? Well, now how can we, as I said already, build? How can I build or help other people build, whether it be with my money, I invest with them, I go work with them, I learn new skills so I can build. So one, take care of yourself, then sort of help affect change. That's what I recommend. The kind of talk I gave at both those conferences was like, you can't just go buy your Bitcoin and go sit on a hill and hope in 10 years that you're rich. But we need to build the ecosystem so that Bitcoin really becomes its full true potential. And so I think, one of the things I think about Bitcoin is it changes this incentive mechanism. And if we can store our value in a way that can't be debased and stolen from us, it allows us to focus on putting more value back into the world. And I think that's the real key. Take care of ourselves, take care of others, put more value into the world, and we can lift our way out of this. Again, I'm super bullish on when millions of entrepreneurs are, backs are against the wall. We know that whatever the collectivism, socialism, communism, fascism, we know it doesn't work. As Nietzsche said, that which is falling shall ye also push. So let's just give them a little push, take care of ourselves, and we're going to be okay.
I 100% agree with that. And, the optimism, build through it. Yes, if you work hard enough, if you believe enough, I truly believe that, the world is kind of, you will get somewhat what you wanted, but you really, really got to fight for it and really believe in it. So Mark, always an honor to have you on Simply Bitcoin IRL. Really, really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, Nico, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mark. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the show. You know what to do. Smash that like button. Consider subscribing if you feel like we provided you value. Consider checking out Mark's content. It's incredible. You can find it at at one Mark Moss on YouTube, and check out Market Disruptors, another YouTube channel that Mark runs as well. So, guys, we'll see you back for the live show tomorrow at 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Take it easy, everybody.
Today's episode was brought to you by BitcoinWell.com, a Bitcoin-only platform on a mission to enable financial independence.